Welcome back to another episode of Biblio Files, a show from the Ann Arbor District Library in Michigan that's all about books. Each episode, we usually take a few minutes to answer one book-related question, but this episode is a little bit of a departure. We all decided to pick and read a book by Kazuo Ishiguro, and I'm very excited to find out what we've all picked. My name is Christopher, and as always, I'm here with Amanda and Lucy. Amanda, what did you pick for today?
So I will first admit that I haven't read anything by this author, and I have not really been drawn to reading books by him. But for this episode, I wanted to grab a book, and I had a hard time choosing. None of them seemed like something I would normally gravitate towards reading. But the book I chose is 1989, The Remains of the Day. Albeit because it was a little bit shorter. But Remains of the Day, 1989, it was made into a movie with Anthony Hopkins, which I have not seen. The book centers on one of the last great English butlers, Stevens. Stevens has worked in Darlington Hall for decades, and after the last lord passes away, an American gentleman comes in and moves in the home, and that is now who he is serving. And that gentleman needs to be away for a time, and so Stevens has this rare opportunity to have time off, and he goes on a 6-day road trip. So the entirety of the book is Stevens on this road trip across England. He's going to visit one of the former housekeepers that he used to work with at Darlington Hall. Now, Stevens is one of the great last butlers. He's very formal. He is very proper. He's very rigid. He takes his job very seriously. He's very thoughtful about dignity and how to be the perfect butler at all times, whether he's working or not working. And he's on this road trip, and this 6-day road trip in his car gives him time to reflect upon his career, the various people that he's worked with, the lords he's worked for, like the war, everything going on in England. And he starts to wonder and ponder towards the end, like, have I done enough? Did I do the right thing? Was I a good enough butler? So for me, it was not my favorite read. I did read the whole book. I feel like I would have enjoyed the book less if I hadn't seen Downton Abbey, the TV show, which sounds silly, but that's my most familiar take on the sort of the upstairs, downstairs, like, and how a house is set up with great lords and the butlers and the under butlers and the footmen, that kind of thing. So when I was reading the book, I was honestly picturing some of the visuals that I saw in Downton Abbey. And I had a hard time liking the character. It's a beautiful book. This book is very well reviewed. A lot of people love it. It is a great book. And I'm really glad I did finish it, because the end is sort of like the payoff where you get this contemplative moment of him and the housekeeper sort of like contemplating like their lives and was it enough? Did I do the right thing? And what's left at the remains of the day, like what is left after you are done with your butler duties. So that is in a nutshell, The Remains of the Day. It's sentimental. It is a good reflective novel. A lot of people like this book. I guess I'm glad I'm read it now that I know I finished it. I wanted to quit it very early on, but I am glad I read it all the way to the end, because I like it more knowing how the ending and that payoff of just contemplating your life on earth and what you do with your time. So that is Remains of the Day. Did anybody else pick that one?
Nope.
No? Okay. Well, there you go. Lucy, what did you choose to talk about today?
So the book that I chose is Ishiguro's latest novel. It's called Clara and the Sun. And this is so different from Remains of the Day. It's set in the sort of near future. He never specifies. And Clara is an artificial friend. So she's in a human body, but she's an AI, and she's created to be a friend / toy for a child or teen. And these are very common. The book opens with Clara in a shop waiting to be picked, and she's sort of having these conversations with other AFs in the shop. And she is chosen by a girl named Josie. Josie's mom isn't sure, because Clara is an older model of AFs. She's not one of the newer models, but this is good because the newer models lack empathy. So Josie and her mom bring Clara home, and we learn early on that Josie gets sick a lot. And Clara, AFs are powered by the sun, they're solar powered. So Clara sort of prays to the sun. That's sort of where the title comes from. She believes that the sun will restore everybody, human or artificial. And so she begins praying to the sun to help Josie. But the book is really interesting because Clara is the narrator. It's all narrated through Clara's point of view, and she is an AF. So the book is her looking back, and she's an unreliable narrator, but she's also an extremely effective narrator because she's not human, but she's made to be observant. She is like very descriptive in colors and sounds, but in a very basic way. And the language, I mean, his writing is beautiful, and her specific language is very poetic. And she, you sort of have to puzzle things together. Like, she's always talking about students learning on oblongs, which I think is like an iPad or a tablet. She calls construction workers like overhaul man. She just is very literal in what she sees. And through her narration, you kind of understand why AFs are part of life, and you start to learn about why Josie's getting sick. And this sort of reminds me of Never Let Me Go by Ishiguro, because you realize that like children have an option to be genetically modified, and how to be for greater intelligence, and how that helps them and how that hinders them. So without giving out too much away about that, that's sort of why Clara is in the picture. She is, to me, the most interesting character in the book. Though she is a robot, technically, she's extremely compassionate, and she does exhibit empathy. And we sort of learn with her as she gains new information that's too much for her. She sees everything in like these prisms. It's really interesting. It was hard to figure out at first why she was just seeing boxes, but then I realized it's like she has to get each piece of information individually and put them together. So that was a really interesting narrative technique as well. I think that Ishiguro makes the reader do some work here to sort of figure out what's going on. And I thought the book would be about Clara sort of gaining sentience, becoming sentient because she's an AF, but you realize that she is completely sentient. And you realize that because we're getting her memories. This whole book is her memories, and she's attaching emotional importance to all of them. And to me, that was one of the most moving parts of the novel. I thought the novel was extremely moving. It was beautifully written, and you get attached to Clara in a way that I think you would get attached to any human character. It makes some really interesting points about how we rely on technology. It was interesting to read when I did, because we had just shut everything down, and I was looking at my kids like going to school on a tablet, essentially like the kids in this book. But I think ultimately it's about love, which is interesting to say when it's about a robot and a human. And so that is a lot that I just said about Clara and the sun. But I could have said so much more, because it's just, I was just astounded by it. And it's not very long, but it's just so rich and so beautiful and so moving. So that is Clara and the Sun. Christopher, what did you pick?
Well, I just want to say it sounds like we've all read completely different authors, because the book that I chose is Nocturnes. And this is a collection of short stories. Each short story is based around the theme of music and the end of the day. And what a great premise to put a collection of short stories together. Imagine if you were a writer and you had 5 stories to write, all about something to do with music and nightfall. You could go off in so many different directions. And that's what Ishiguro has done here. So there are 5 very different stories. I want to say they're a little bit Kundera-esque, because Kundera was also a musician and studied music. And he his characters are somewhat similar to the ones in this book. They all are, they're all narrated from the first person, and they kind of blend this reflective nostalgia with oddly placed slapstick. So very unlikely, ridiculous things happen in the midst of people trying to figure their lives out. And it was kind of startling and funny at several points. Two of the stories are related, which is also an interesting technique. Not all of them are. So it's, but it's a fun, quick read. Ultimately, I will say I'm not sure that the book is going to stay with me throughout my life, if it's something that I will look back upon and think about a lot. But it was a very fast read, and it was really entertaining. I just wanted to say the reason that I think this topic came up is from watching the movie Never Let Me Go, which was a very effective experience for me. I was really, really taken and startled by the movie. And so I was always curious about his writing. I'm still not sure we have a good sense of who he is as a writer. He seems to be all over the place, which is,
I think that speaks to his, why he won the Nobel Prize. It's like he can convincingly write a butler. He can write short stories about music. He can write this artificially intelligent being that you become so attached to. And like, I remember when I read Never Let Me Go, I was totally taken by surprise by the premise of that book. In the middle of the book, I was like, I think his talent, I think, is pretty astounding.
Yeah, I think that really speaks a lot to the writer and his skill, because he's able to write these. And it seems like all three of ours were the first person, where you have this rich character like speaking in a very specific tone and emoting very specific things. And that was part of when I was trying, and I had never read anything by him before or seen any of the movies. And when I had to narrow down to 3 books to read, to talk about for this episode, and they were all so different, and all of them were sort of outside my normal realm of reading. And I couldn't decide. I just had this block. I'm like, I narrowed it down to 3, and they were all so different. And I didn't really read much about the author other than the blurb on the back of the book. I didn't really want to know, but part of it was because the books were all so different sounding. You've got sci-fi, you've got just this dry, uptight butler, it's so different. And I just think that's amazing that an author can skillfully do that. There are a lot of authors who kind of dip into various genres, but they sort of have a similar thread. And I can't think of, I'm sure there are plenty of other examples, but I just really appreciate the skill that this author is able to, and a lot of his books are so well loved,
Yeah. It would be interesting to read his entire body of work, which is not even that, he's written a lot, but I think a lot of people who win the Nobel Prize for Literature are a lot more prolific at the point that they win it. But you would get something different with each book. It would feel, like you said, Christopher, like you were just reading a different author every time. So.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's our episode for today. As always, we would love to know if you've read any books by Ishiguro and what you thought of them, and if you have a favorite one, or if you completely disagreed or agreed with us. You can leave your comments on the AADL website. That would be great. Until next time, take care.